success is not just about hard work and effort and wanting it badly enough. It's actually about finding and leveraging unfair advantages. And an unfair advantage is a condition, asset, circumstance that gives you an upper hand. It's like a head start in a race. And essentially what we're saying is double down on your strengths, not your weaknesses.
Welcome back to the You Can Too podcast. On today's show, we have founder, entrepreneur, startup strategist. He started his education in medicine, got a degree in economics, and ended up investing in business course and writing the best business book of 2021 for a damn good reason. Hasan Kubba, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hey, James, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. I'd love to start because your journey is profound and you're still so young to see what you've been able to do. It's truly profound. What are some of the things, some of the pivotal moments that really brought you down this path to begin with that really propelled your career?
Yeah, it's a bit of, we talk about, one of the unfair advantages we talk about is right place, right time. And I
Yeah.
feel like there was a little bit of that for me to come across this online course to start my own business. I talk about myself, James, as an unnatural entrepreneur. I think a lot of entrepreneurs you
I
speak
know.
to, they were hustling from when they were kids. They were, I don't know, buying and selling baseball cards or something. And I just wasn't doing that. I never really had that kind of innate sort of drive. So for me, it's kind of interesting because I had to learn it from scratch, and I had to even change my whole mindset to even think of myself as an entrepreneur. So I think coming across an online course way back in about 10 years ago now, where it was much more weird to invest in an online course, when it was much more like sketchy and shady to even think about like kind of making money online, was still a little bit like weird thing to do. I just decided to do that after I graduated university, and it was a big investment for me, and it was a big risk for me. And people told me it's a scam and it's fake, but I felt like I did my due diligence and I felt like it made sense. And I think I have to say, it was that moment probably which changed things. Another pivotal moment was meeting Ash, my co-author. And that was like, so the online course taught me about the online business world, and then Ash, who's a friend and became my co-author and kind of a mentor, he taught me about the tech startup world, which is like kind of different. It's like the Silicon Valley kind of apps and software and that kind of world of business where you raise funding from venture capitalists and stuff. So I think those are the two main pivot points of like suddenly like seeing things in a different way. But the actual slog of entrepreneurship, of working with clients, of growing my business, that was just like a step-by-step difficult process. And that's the main thing that changed me.
Yeah, I think for both of us, that the investment in yourself is something that really changes your perception of yourself, and it changes the way that you take how seriously you take what you're going to step into. And
Mhm.
so after meeting your co-author and everything that you got into, what were some of the lessons that you learned early on that were maybe harder to learn? Like you said, it was a lot of pivotal moments, but what were some of the things that really changed your mindset to stick in it long term? Because I think that's the hurdle that many people have.
Yeah, I think what it is for me, it's not. So some people they have trouble sticking with something, and some people have trouble starting with something. And I think for me, it
Yeah.
was trouble starting. I can start all the theory, but get me started on the action was hard. Innately, I was the type that, and I see it now, I'm like, oh no. I see it in others. I see it in like prospective, people who reach out to me who say, readers of the book, etc., who ask for advice and things. And there's a classic thing from the old school days of self-development, which is seminar junkies or self-help junkies.
Mhm.
And it's like basically those people who are addicted to reading or consuming information or going to seminars and pumping themselves up and getting excited by plans and then never putting it into action. That was the bit to actually put it into action. That was the bit that changed everything. And that was the big leap for me because I'm that type that overthinks, overanalyzes. Well, I've changed that about myself actually, but kind of naturally I was a bit more of the type to overthink, overplan, over research, and to get past that and to actually execute on what you're learning and have a good speed of implementation. That was the absolute game changer for me, and that's what changed my whole life, turned it like has allowed me to escape from having a normal, 9 to 5 job. For the last 10 years, I've just been an entrepreneur, working for myself, as somebody who never kind of thought I'd do that. And just having freedom and flexibility, and having clients getting taken care of, having passive income coming in without me actively necessarily doing that particular thing. It's just a complete game changer, and been incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you on that, where I didn't see myself as a natural entrepreneur. Like I told you prior to this, was I invested into a coaching program, not really knowing what I was getting myself into, but I knew that I didn't want a 9 to 5. And so I was like, I didn't really do much due diligence. So the fact that you did the due diligence to even like see if it was the right path, I'm curious, like what was it about that course, or was it even the course knowledge that really shifted for you, or was it the investment in yourself that made you commit to a different level?
I think what made sense, and I say due diligence, it makes it sound like such a formal process. To be honest, no, it wasn't. It was more a case of
Yeah.
me kind of, okay, so what this guy, he doesn't even offer this course anymore, and he's off the grid, so you can't even find him as like an influencer or anything. But what he was doing is he was talking about freedom businesses, starting a freedom business. So I wasn't actually quite inclined to like making a ton of money at that stage. It was just kind of like, I just wanted time freedom. I wanted flexibility. I would see everybody kind of miserable, having that Sunday night feeling about, dreading the Monday morning, looking forward to the weekend. That type of like, 5 for 2, like living 5 miserable
Hmm.
days to have 2 okay days where you have the time off. So for me, it was more about that. It was more at the time. So it was about freedom business, and he was saying how it's about setting up a real business. It's not some weird arbitrage. It's not some weird like some, I don't know, some kind of scammy thing or some kind of hack or some kind of get rich quick scheme. He was like, this is going to be tough. It's going to take time to build, but eventually you can kind of make it more passive. You can hire, build a team around it, and service your clients. And these are real life clients, and you have to get away from behind the laptop screen and actually go out there into the real world. And he was describing how it's like, this is a real thing. This is a real business. This isn't like some weird click this thing and do this thing and then suddenly you'll make a ton of money. It's not a one
Yeah.
weird hack or one weird trick. It was like, no, we're going to actually learn marketing, branding. We're going to learn copywriting. We're going to learn, the different things that drive people, the kind of businesses that are taking off right now, the different trends, the different technological trends, etc. And that's what made me kind of go, this makes sense. There are people doing these kinds of businesses. There are gaps in this kind of market. Now I see it. So it was kind of like part of his funnel was to educate me on that. And to be honest, I can't remember exactly what kind of research I did, but that's the bit where it was like, okay, this isn't like a get rich quick thing. It's going to take time. And he's saying it's going to take time. And that's what made me feel like, no, this is real,
Mm. Because the get rich quick, it can be real, but most of the time it doesn't work that way. And the
Yeah.
intention that you had, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it can. I guess it can. Look, there are ways. There are far easier ways, and there are far more difficult ways to make money. It's essentially what it is, but none of them is like super easy, where it's just like, yeah, just click here kind of thing. And if it is, that's based on like kind of catching some kind of pump on crypto or something. Like it's like some kind of luck thing that you can't replicate and might just make you hooked and then lose all your money, a bit like a casino would. So yeah, I would say there isn't really such a thing as it depends what you mean by quick. I mean,
Of course.
2 to 5 years is really quick compared to a normal career, but it's not what people think
Yeah.
of. People don't think 2 to 5. I mean, 2 is quite low. Like 5, 3 to 5 years. I mean, it took me around that. It took me about 3 years, I think, just under that, something like that. And I wouldn't say I was rich, but I was like making sustainable money every month, enough money to be able to invest in things like real estate, like shares, stocks, consider angel
Yeah.
investing, that kind, but not like flashy, never been like super flashy, never been like something over the top. No.
Mhm. Yeah, I think our idea of quick definitely is a little bit messed up, because quick could be 10 years. Like quick could be 5 years. Quick could be that. But if we see it in a sense that quick is 10 days, 10 weeks, that kind of thing,
Exactly.
obviously that's not a sustainable route to going towards something. And I think the path at least from my perspective, and I'd love to hear your perspective on it, is not to get rich quick, but it's to learn the skills that allow you to sustain that success, right? What skill from that you've been able to, or at least from your experience in business and your experience in entrepreneurship, what skill do you wish you developed earlier?
Oh, very good question. Um, yeah, I wish I just started earlier. I wish I'd just gotten into like maybe like straight up copywriting. You know, I think copywriting
Mm,
is one of those skills that if you, it's essentially, I mean, it's a fancy way of saying persuasive writing, but it also applies. I mean, it
yeah.
doesn't even need to be writing. It could just be persuasive communication, or in other words, sales. So it can. Look, what's the difference between sales and marketing? Marketing is um, one to many, whereas sales is one to one. That's the main difference. That's how I like
Mm,
to see it. And that
yeah.
skill to persuade, that skill to be able to take rejections, that skill to be able to take somebody down a path from, from problem to solution to proof and credibility to like them to actually take action is a very powerful skill. And it's not just used in sales or in commerce, it's used in everything. Like just communicating any point, you know, putting any point forward. It requires persuasion. So I think I wish I'd gotten some kind I did a bit of sales job as a part-time. I did some telesales.
Mm,
But I wish I'd known that such a path exists where you could sit there and just write, they call it copy, marketing copy, and to sell a product or something. That would have been incredible. Imagine I'd been doing that since I was at since I was a student or something, since I was like 18. That would be so good. I'll be making so much money. It's very high paid. It's a skill.
mm,
Some people are better at it than others. Everybody can develop it as a skill as well, but it might not come as naturally to some as to others. Um, so yeah, I think that's the one I would focus on. It's a very powerful skill set.
yeah, absolutely. When I started in this entrepreneurial path, I started to like sales was really like the first kind of, I guess, skill that you could say I learned, and it was like the forefront of everything that I did. It wasn't I jumped onto becoming a creator as more of like a coach instead of a creator kind of aspect. And so there's both skills in itself, but I think that sales is something that is like it can never be taken from you. But like a lot of people are trying to make money quick in a sense that that's the path that's going to lead them to a life that they want instead of like focusing on the person that they have to become, the skills that they have to acquire. And I think that that's definitely a skill that I think more people should be intentional about learning. In your book, you I love your book. I love the mission of your book. I love everything that you're talking about because it's not, like I said before, it's not something that is really in the world. So I'd love to dive into what the unique advantage is and how we can really get clear on what ours is. Is there a process that you go through or that you've brought clients through that allow them to really get clear on what that looks like for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, the unfair advantage, how you already have what it takes to succeed. This is the book that I wrote with Ash Ali, my co-author. And the central premise of the book is that success is not just about hard work and effort and wanting it badly enough. It's actually about finding and leveraging unfair advantages. And an unfair advantage is a condition, asset, circumstance that gives you an upper hand. It's like a head start in a race. And essentially what we're saying is double down on your strengths, not your weaknesses. In self-development in general, we're both coaches. And one of the areas that people think that they need to work on, and sometimes they do, and I'll explain when that's appropriate, is their weaknesses. Okay, I'm weak at this
Yeah.
thing. I need to get stronger at this. And most of the time, to be successful in a career or a business, whatever it might be, is to, instead of working on your weaknesses, is to double down on your strengths. And doubling down on your strengths is just a far better path. If you can just partner with people who have strengths which are your weaknesses, in other words, their unfair advantages are your disadvantages, that's it. So unlike school, where that's considered cheating, in business and in life, getting people to do stuff for you is really, really good skill. And so that's kind of the interpersonal skills that you can use. Now, the exception to that, I did mention that sometimes you should work on your weaknesses. That's for your personal life. And there are some things which are just fundamentals for everybody to work on. So, for example, communication. If that's a weakness, that's something that everybody would benefit from working on. But of course, if you're kind of working more on a product side, or like, let's say you're a coder, or let's say you're designing and developing products, it's still really important, but just maybe less so than if you're in sales or marketing or something like that, or human resources. So everything is contextual. And the idea behind the book is like, there is no one size fits all advice that applies to everybody, apart from like core fundamental principles. Everything else is like, it depends. Like, should I go to university? Should I drop out of university? Should I do this as a side hustle, or should I, leave my job to do it full time? The answer is it depends. It depends on your unfair advantages. It depends on your goals. It depends on your underlying personality type even. It depends on so many things. So you asked, how do you identify your unfair advantage? Well, here's the thing that I didn't mention. Here's the trick. You might feel like, oh, I don't have any unfair advantages. I wasn't born rich. I don't have a rich uncle, or I'm not super well connected, or I don't know. Didn't go to an Ivy League school or something. But the good news is unfair advantages is something that we all have. We all have our unique set of unfair advantages. And what seems like a disadvantage can be turned into an advantage with the right mindset. So this is the kind of stuff that's covered in the book, and we'll probably get into it in more depth now. But you asked me specifically, how do you find your unfair advantage? And we've developed a framework in the book called the Miles Framework. And the Miles Framework is a way to audit yourself, to understand, okay, here are the different categories and types of unfair advantages. Here are some examples. Here's the different types of, let's say, intelligence and insight. Okay, here are the different types of intelligence. You got book smarts, you got kind of street smarts, interpersonal skills, you got creativity, that's creative intelligence. You've also got insight. Okay, how good am I at each of these? Okay, who should I work with? Who should I partner with? Who should I hire? These are the kinds of questions to ask ourselves. And it's a complete shift in thinking, as opposed to thinking you need to become perfect. You need to level up in everything. You need to, work on all your weaknesses. And that's kind of the key to what makes the book work. Is I realized that all these, on my journey, I met a lot of multimillionaire who became mentors to me. And I realized that they're not perfect. They don't do everything right. They've got so many weaknesses, but it doesn't matter because they're doubling down on their strengths.
Yeah. And I love that part of the book where even your disadvantages can be turned into an advantage if you see it as such. And it's like there was a perspective shift for me a couple years ago where instead of asking why is this happening to me, I asked how is this happening for me. And it's kind of like exactly what you're speaking there. It's like you change the questions that you ask yourself and you're going to get a different answer. And so like
Absolutely.
thinking of that in that way, we have to be able to look for what our advantages are in our disadvantages. But so many of us just want to accept or at least see that as just our fate, and that's just how life works. There's nothing that I can really do to make this change, but it's the mindset that's behind that. Where did you develop that mindset? Where did that come from for you?
The mindset of like, which particular one are you talking about? Are you talking about how to question and ask yourself questions to motivate, or are you talking about to double down on your strengths?
To double down on your strengths.
Okay. That's the thing. I didn't have that mindset when I was younger and when I first started in business. I thought I have to figure everything out. So credit needs to go. Okay, so first of all, the course I took was very inspired by Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Work Week. So the whole idea was like, how do you delegate and outsource? How do you do all that kind of stuff to work with others, to be able to, start a business, to have some freedom, to be able to make passive income, etc. Work 4 hours a week, whatever. So I think credit goes to that because it's because of that whole thinking. And from the get-go, the business. So for example, I started a website. I was like doing websites, and then I was doing other forms of marketing because I was kind of became a one-stop shop for marketing, like a full-service marketing agency. And from the get-go, it was like, you need to hire a designer, you need to hire a developer. And hire doesn't mean hire full-time. It just means like, work with a freelancer on a project. And that mindset from the get-go was like, oh, interesting. So, I still remember, like, when a client would reach out, like my first client or something, and they would be like, how's it going? I'm like, yeah, we're working on it. And I'm not doing anything. That was weird. That was a weird feeling. That was very much an aha feeling of like, oh, this is how, because that's not how it works in school. That's not how it works in university. You can never be like, I'm working on something and you're not actually doing anything. So it felt like a cheat. It felt like this weird hack. But that's how humans have been doing stuff forever. It's leveraging, it's working as teams. It's leveraging others who have skills. You know, I'm not using the designer to do coding and I'm not using the coder to do design. And what essentially I became is like a project manager without even realizing. And I became like the sales and the client relations and also the strategist, because a big part of it was just explaining what are we doing in this marketing, what strategy are we going to take. They didn't know, these businesses that I was working with. So that was, I think, what opened up my eyes to doing this more and more. And also, like I said, work kind of having these sort of friends or unofficial mentors who were clearly not applying all the business advice. I remember, just as a funny example, we're talking about delegating right now. One of my biggest mentors was like super successful, wealthy guy, kind of a workaholic. He self-admitted workaholic, but he never. He always spent the quality time he needed to spend with his kids, his family, etc. So he kind of had his priorities straight. He just said, I have no hobbies. My hobby is work. And so that was him. And I never related to that. But the interesting thing about him is he was so successful and he was so like inefficient in many ways. For example, he'd want to like expand one of his clinics. He was an orthodontist. He'd expand one of his clinics. And instead of just waiting for an architect to like draw up the blueprints, the plans for the extension and the, you know, the renovation of his clinics, he sat there and started drawing it himself. He's like, the architect's too slow. And I'm like, what? But I've read in business books such and such and the course such and such that you're supposed to delegate and you're supposed to focus on your strengths and your core competencies. And you know what? It doesn't matter. It didn't matter. It just made him move faster. The fundamental principle was urgency and speed, which was actually more important in a way than kind of specialization. So you can break the rules, you can be imperfect, and you can be extremely successful if you make sure to get the focus on what your core strengths are, to put the time in, to be focused, to have urgency, etc., to have the right mindsets, essentially.
Yeah, I think that really is powerful because, like you said, I think in a lot of I've had the same mindset, or I had the same mindset where I want to read the next book so that it's going to give me the more information. I want to listen to the podcast. Just one more podcast is going to be the missing piece, but it just doesn't work that way. If we just double down on our strengths and take the action, we're going to learn a lot more from taking action than taking information. And like you said, you had a lot of mentors growing up, and then now you're working with some of the really massive creators in the world. Like I said, I found you from Ali Abdaal. What have you learned from working with some of the bigger people in this space that have set them apart from other people that really don't succeed?
Oh, what set them apart? That's a great question. But first, I want to say what makes them the same. They're just as fearful as us. They just they have as much kind of like fear of selling, fear of something not working out, fear of risk, fear of putting themselves out there to a certain extent. Obviously, they're putting themselves out there because they're creators, they're YouTubers or something. But like, let's say, for example, Ali, because he's so open, I could talk about Ali a lot. I was coaching him through him launching his first like self-hosted course, the Part-Time YouTuber Academy. And he was so afraid, honestly, and he talks about this publicly, which is why I can talk about it. Otherwise, I wouldn't talk about my clients. But he's extremely open, and he was so afraid of charging a lot of money and being seen as like, even though from the beginning he had a business mindset, he set up his YouTube channel actually to promote his exam prep business that he was doing, right, to get into medical school. So from the beginning, he was kind of commercial, but still he was afraid to charge a lot of money and to go premium and to put himself out there. And I wanted to start by saying what makes them the same. And this is across all of them. They all have certain fears of certain things, some more than others, of course, and some are more experienced and they just push through them. Just like, I don't know, for public speaking, I used to be terrified, and now I don't really only get very slightly, like a little bit of nerves, a little bit, but hardly any, when I used to be terrified when I was younger. So I wanted to point that out first. But I think what makes them different is speed of execution, speed of implementation. They just, okay, let's put this into action. Let's try it. Let's change the thumbnail there. Let's do a video about this. Let's make an offer there. Okay, let's put a Calendly link here to offer people to have a session. Okay, let's put together some syllabus and a landing page for an online course. They just do it, and a big part of being a coach, and this sounds funny but then I'll explain in a second what I mean. A big piece of being a coach is picking the right clients. And I'll give a metaphor for that, or an analogy for that. Harvard or Oxford or Cambridge or MIT or Stanford or whatever, is it that their teaching and education and is so good, or is it that their filtering process is so good to get the kind of really successful people coming out of them? And this is what you have to remember as a coach. You can't make somebody take action. You can't make somebody become successful. You're there to support, facilitate, catalyze, hold space, help them get clarity, help them with accountability. But ultimately, you can't do the work for them. So you got to pick the right clients. And thankfully, I have stuck with that and had the integrity to tell somebody, you know what, I don't know if I can help you here, and not offer them coaching, even if they're willing to pay, if I don't feel like I can believe in them. And I think that's absolutely key. So I think, the biggest part of it is just to take action despite fear and to implement. That's what makes them different.
Yeah. I love everything that you just said right there, because when I first got into coaching, it was like, I just want every client that I can get. And then the more I started working with people, the more that I realized I do not want every client I can get. Like if it means turning down money to keep my reputation of actually helping people that I want to work with, it's like the mindset, like I see coaches as people that can believe in their clients more than they believe in themselves. And that causes them to take a lot more action. And of course, the accountability and the clarity and the catalyst of actually taking action. But if you don't believe in them, then how are you going to be able to help them? Right. And so I support that so much. There was something that you spoke about a minute ago where you said that you used to be nervous going on stage and now there's just slight nerves. I'm curious, what has changed within your internal narrative? What has changed within your process that allows you to, release that? Or is it just more reps?
It's definitely more reps. And it's also your beliefs change as well. And I think you can sort of hack the beliefs a little bit, but ultimately you need to get the reps in. So the beliefs is something like, people want to hear what you've got to say, stuff like that. Like this kind of like, if there are deep internal sort of, and this is very common, like imposter syndrome, kind of like, why would, another big example, Ali Abdaal writing a book. Again, use him as an example, as somebody who's so transparent. He was like, why would people want to read a book by me? He even thought, why would people want to learn YouTube from me? And at that stage, he had like 1.5 million subs, and that's,
I know,
there's a bit of inflation as well, because like nowadays that's probably worth more compared to 5 years ago. But the point is that this kind of imposter syndrome is so common, and that the belief, it goes back to sales as well. In sales, if you feel like you're offering value versus if you feel like you're taking value and you're persuading them, like if you have this mindset that I'm going to convince them, that's a terrible mindset to have. If you have a mindset of like, I'm going to add value here, and you know what, if they're a good fit, then I'll offer them the coaching or something like that. If let's say it's to sell a coaching program or something. Otherwise, I'll just, I hope I'll leave them better than where I found them. I hope I've added value. I hope I'll point them to some resources, and my DMs, my inbox is open. My DMs are open if they have any further questions. And that's how I see it. So I think a huge piece of it is to tackle that, and not through therapy per se, maybe sometimes, but I think no, actually better through action, through reps. If you have this kind of thing of like, oh, I'm not worthy. No, if you just, put yourself out there, get started, talk to prospective clients, get some rejections, etc., then you'll start to pick this stuff up. You'll be like, oh wait, all these people who I thought are so clever and so amazing are actually just normal people. And when I let's say, again, using coaching examples, when I just hold space and ask them questions, they get tremendous value out of that. It's not even me. Like, I don't even take credit for it. Like, coaching frameworks just work as a protocol, as a methodology. And this is kind of, I've run some courses in the past of teaching people coaching, especially YouTubers. And they're just like, whoa. I'm like, yeah, like, don't feel like it's you. It's not even that much about it being you. It's more about like coaching it as a framework just works. You know, you is part of it, sure, but then when you're having that imposter syndrome, it helps to kind of be like, it's just a framework, so it's all good. If I just follow that, then I'll be fine. So yeah, belief change is a part of it, but but not in a vacuum, not just in your own mind. You need to get out there and get the reps in.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's like the taking the action, you're going to learn a lot more than taking in the information.
Yeah.
That's one thing I love about Ali is he's so transparent about all of his fears and all of the things that he goes through, because a lot of people at that level are not talking about that kind of stuff. And it's so good. It's refreshing to see, because even like for me, when I started my coaching business at 17, imposter syndrome I was full of it. And then I started realizing imposter syndrome is probably a good thing, because it means that I'm getting out of my comfort zone. I'm expanding what I perceive to be possible, and my beliefs change the more that I take action on things. And I had a friend ask me the other day, how have I been able to convince people to work with me? And it's like, I don't convince people. That's the last thing I do, is convince people. It's like when you hop on a call with someone and to see if you're a good fit, it's like it's literally to see if you're a good fit, because if you're not a good fit, I'm not going to work with you, kind of thing. It's that
Yeah.
not needy energy that gets people to want to work with you, to believe that it can happen. What is your advice for new entrepreneurs that want to get started in something? Maybe they're struggling to get started. Maybe they don't know where to what to focus on. What's your advice from your experience?
I kind of grew up thinking that everything, I mean, not with these words. I did end up studying economics, so then these words did come into it.
Yeah.
But I kind of used to think that, in economics, one of the theories is just that of equilibrium. Like, yeah, like there's it's kind of like, if you take it at face value, it's kind of like there's no space in the market, There's so much competition. One of the things I was thinking in the early days is, who needs a website these days? Seriously, web design? Like, come on, what is this? The 90s, when the internet is new and everyone needs web design? Like, who needs such a service? I'm sure there are millions of web design agencies. How am I going to be be a web design agency to start with? And actually, no, there is a ton of, and I was saying that I had this kind of mindset even when I was younger. You kind of feel like, the adults have taken care of everything. Like, everything's taken care of. If there's an idea, it's been done. If there's, like, I kind of had this, like I said, not a natural entrepreneur. And I think one of the things to say is, there are gaps in the market. There are, like, opportunities out there. There's a lot of demand for things that there aren't enough supply of. And even if there's a lot of supply of, if you can just stand out in some way, if you can just build trust in some way. To me, that was it. It was about building trust. And I think that was my unfair advantage of my first business, which is just to get clients for a marketing agency, is trust. I would meet them face to face and I would explain it in simple terms. And I think that skill set is actually what made me able to write the book in simple terms, and why it's done so well, because I can explain, like, seemingly complex human psychology, marketing, business, entrepreneurship kind of principles, product principles, in simple language. It's an intuitive, easy to understand language. And I think that trust is what led it there. So anybody thinking to start, you don't need to be perfect. You just need your first client. Don't worry about silly things, which I would have worried about had I not been taught not to, which is like registering the company, getting a business bank account, I don't know, register patents or IP or trademarks or tax. People worry about people worry about all this stuff before they've even started. And you don't need to worry about any of that before you start. You just need to, it's not a business until money comes in. Let the money come into your personal account. It's fine. You can take care of it later. It's not an issue. People think it's an issue. It's not an issue. Just get started. Get your first client. When that, the metaphorical cash register rings, cha-ching, once that happens, then you're in business. Before then, you're just messing around in a hobby. Like, what are you even doing? So you need to get to that sale point ASAP. You need to offer, even if you need to offer something and then figure out how to do it and then do it. That was the thing that most terrified me at the beginning. I was like, what? I can't make promises. And I would think it's like this huge thing. Similar to, like, I work with people who want to start an online course quite often. And they go, well, I can't, or even, I guess we talk about coaching a lot. And coaching and courses kind of, there's a big overlap, right? They go, I can't guarantee results. I'm a really successful YouTuber. I'm a really successful author. I'm a really successful, startup founder. I can't guarantee that somebody else is going to have my success. I'm like, yeah, but no one's asking you to guarantee it. And oh, and it's kind of the same thing. It's like, what's the worst case scenario? You refund them the money. So what have you got to lose? Some time. What you're going to do, you're going to gain so much insight. You're going to build the unfair advantage of insight. What's one of the big unfair advantages to have? So there's nothing to lose. You're going to learn so much. So you need to get started. You need to figure things out. Be resourceful. I mean, there are 4 mindsets actually that we talk about in the book. And this isn't a long chapter, the mindset chapter, short chapter, just touch on these briefly, which is number 1, vision. Have a big vision for yourself. Have a big why. See it, feel it. That really helps. 2 is resourcefulness. They say that entrepreneurship, this is a quote from the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. He says entrepreneurship is jumping off a cliff and assembling an airplane on the way down. And it's like, yes, that's exactly how it feels.
Yeah.
So we have vision, we have resourcefulness, we have lifelong learning. If you're listening to this, you're a lifelong learner. Pretty much guarantee that. So you've got to. Now, there are people, and usually they're not listening to this podcast, so it doesn't apply to them. But there are people who just take action and don't do any theory, don't read any books, don't listen to it. And that's bad as well, by the way. Well, we just don't look at that world because we don't see those people. Because they need some strategy to get started. They need to head in the right direction. Otherwise, they're just messing around, making silly mistakes that they could have learned just from one little tip. So lifelong learning is absolutely key, having that kind of growth mindset. And finally, we have sort of resilience. We have that kind of persistence. If you don't have that grit, that determination, that resistance, that resilience, you aren't going to make it through because it's not going to be a smooth path. You're going to get a lot of people that say no, a lot of people that tell you what you're doing. Like, how could you even think of doing that? And like, it'll only embolden the negative voices in your own head. But you have to be able to push through and figure stuff out. Like, I remember at one point I I was really struggling with SEO. My clients wanted search engine optimization, in other words, to get to the top of Google. And it was so difficult to find people who actually could do it, but, aren't just saying they could do it and taking your money and running. And then, because it takes time to do. So there's a lot of charlatans out there because it takes a good 3 to 6 months minimum to do. So they could just take your money for 3 to 6 months and then be like, oh, didn't work, bye. And move on to the next client and keep working. So that was tough. And I had moments where I was like, I'm just going to fail. I'm going to be fired by my clients. I'm not able to do this. This guy I've hired can't do it. And it was complete nonsense. How am I going to figure this out? I took an online course myself. I tried to learn it myself, tried to apply it myself. I finally found somebody good enough to do it. And it was like, why did I not just continue a career path? Am I even cut out for this? What have I done with my life? You have all these low moments of like, what's going on? And that's just part of the entrepreneurship journey.
It really is. It really is. I love that Reid Hoffman that quote because it is really powerful. I think you probably went through this as well. When I started my coaching business, it was like I didn't want to get a client because I thought I had to have every answer that they had, like to every question that they had. I felt like I had to have the answer. And then I started to realize like it wasn't about having the answers, but it was asking the right questions because they have the answers. We don't have them, right? And taking on that perspective and recognizing that and like just like feeding into taking the action instead of like listening to the internal narrative that's just going to hold us back. It's so important to do that. And I think that you said something that I would rather overestimate my potential than underestimate it. And I think that I love that perspective because many of us, the real thing that's holding us back is a lack of belief. It's the reason I started this podcast was I think so many of us we don't even go down a different path because we don't perceive it as possible. And so we don't even really open up a new opportunity for us because that's not real. That can't happen. So for you, what allowed you to build that belief within yourself, one, and then also be able to keep that? Like you said, there was a lot of low moments.
I think I was very negatively motivated. Now, negative motivation is an interesting one because it's kind of, I guess, a little bit controversial because anything from the dark side or the kind of negative is going to be like, people don't want to talk about it a little bit. But reality is if you study sales, marketing, etc., people are much more motivated by the stick than they are by the carrot. About, on average, twice as motivated. So in other words, if you're writing sales copy, you should focus twice as much on avoiding the things that they don't want, their frustrations, their fears, their pain points, than you do on the on the positive side of like the dream, the reward, the glory. And I think it was that. And it was kind of like the whole, that classic burn the boats mentality. I think it was like, I'm in too deep. I've got to make this work. That was what made it work. It was just saying, I've taken this online course. I've not taken a job. I've spoken about it with other people. Okay, now I better do it. I better deliver. And I didn't deliver for quite a while. It took me a good year and a half to 2 years to even get started after I took the online course, like a year and a half. And my parents were like, okay, get a job, because what have you done? You have done nothing. And I'm like, I'm working on a website for myself. And they're like, just get a job. And the irony is that I was being a perfectionist over my own website, and to make the sales copy perfect, it has to be a good example, representation of me. And then I actually got my first client without the website. And then I actually got my second and then third. And then I never launched my own website, which is so funny. I had a web design agency without a website. That's the hilarious thing. And that, again, it's all in the theme of what we're talking about, of like, you don't need to be perfect. You don't. So I was wasting my time on all this sales copy and this website design, which I still have the designs somewhere on my G drive of like my first ever website from 2012, which was never published. It's just some Photoshop designs. It's hilarious. Yeah,
it really is. Because I know so many people that join the same coaching program as me that they focused on their website for like months on end, just trying to get it up. And it's like, just like you said earlier, it's like, you don't have a business if you don't have clients. You don't have anything if nothing's coming in. So I'm 2.5 years into my coaching business. I don't have a website either. Like, I reinforce that to everyone, because it's like, why are you building something if you have no demand, then no one's going to the website anyway. So what's the point, right? That's the kind of perspective, right? Yeah,
exactly.
Like there's no reason behind it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's
so
a case
your book
of,
is
yeah, I was going to say, James, it's a case of that first client thing, the whole get your first sale, because that then gives you the accountability to do the work. Because the hardest part is starting. And I've recently started a new business, and I'm like there's this whole thing that I have in mind, and I'm struggling. I'm not as much now, but especially like 6 months ago, a year ago, I was like, I had it in mind and I just wasn't getting started with it. And you know what? The cold start problem is a real problem. And you get a bit better at it, definitely better than the first, 10 years ago when I first started trying my first business. But it's hard when you don't have clients, you don't have employees, there's no accountability there. You think you can just conjure it out of thin air. It's not easy. You don't just beat yourself up and say, hey, I'm just not disciplined enough. No, get some accountability. Get an accountability buddy. Get a coach if you have the unfair advantage of money. Get mentors if you have the unfair advantage of a network or some way of getting mentors. Because but even more importantly, get your first client. Because after that, I did not need motivation, because I needed to impress the client and I cared so much. And if you care, then that's it. Then you're going to care about letting somebody down. A paying client. When it's a free client, how much are you really going to care? So I think that's a very important point to add, is that people think they can just brute force their way into being perfectly disciplined, perfectly efficient and productive. And my experience and the experience of, now I think over 100 clients I've worked with probably is like, no, not really. It's very rare that somebody is that conscientious to be able to really do everything on time. Most people, including productivity gurus like Ali Abdaal, procrastinate. Most people put things off. Most people don't do stuff until they're held accountable in some way. And successful people just have a whole team around them holding them accountable to everything. And that's how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, and we can use the example of Ali again. Like, if you don't have the unfair advantage of money, and even if you don't, like I didn't when I started my coaching business, like I told you, I invested, or I contracted more money than I had in my bank account. And so I forced myself, the investment was like me forcing myself to figure it out, take on more than you can handle, and figure it out along the way. I think that more people need to do that, because it's going to force you to show up. Again, the accountability aspect. It's like, now I invested, I have to start doing stuff now. Like, that was such a really scary thing, but it forces you to put your back against the wall and kind of show up. And whether it's posting online and using that as a form of accountability, or getting a buddy or a coach, whatever it comes down to, figuring out some way to get accountability. At the end of the day, you don't need more information. You just need to do the work and show up and fail forward. But I think a lot of us, we're terrified to fail, whether it's we're scared of other people's opinions, or we think that it's the end of the world, when the
Yeah.
biggest failure is just failing to act, because you're going to learn a lot more from failing than doing nothing, right? I mean, at
Yeah,
the end of
and
the day, that's what it really is.
and I think most situations and most types of businesses, there are some exceptions. Generally, you don't have catastrophic
Yeah.
failure anyway. You kind of just like, you can kind of have a soft landing or a pivot or something. It's not really like so black and white where it's like, oh, you completely failed. And usually you don't need to create the circumstances to make it like that. You can kind of soft launch things. You can kind of test things out. But yeah, like as you said, like I think it's very important to point out that we're social animals, we're social creatures, and we work better
Mhm.
with the community, with people. The fastest shortcut, and it's become like cliche, but no one's doing it, including even I'm probably not doing it enough. Is surround yourself with the right people, because that's the biggest shortcut to growth. And no man is an island. You can't just do this all by yourself. And again, another little saying is pressure makes diamonds. And applying pressure on
Yeah.
yourself is a skill. It's a skill to be able to apply pressure on yourself, to be able to get yourself to do stuff. And that's what I think what I was afraid of. And the biggest thing is to learn about fear and to learn about courage, which is actually just acting despite fear, not without fear.
Mhm. Because it never goes away. Like you said, everyone that you've worked with, no matter what it is, everyone's still dealing with it. It's just they push through regardless. Your book, like I said earlier, is no one's, I don't think, ever written on this topic, and I love the topic. But I'm curious, what are some of the books that you grew up like diving into that carved your mindset to run down this path?
I was thinking, I had this question recently in a podcast, and I was thinking, what are the early books that I read that were self-development books? And I'm now looking at my bookshelf to see which ones I've had for a really long time. I think I
Yeah.
used to read a lot of blogs back in like the late 2000s.
Mhm.
So I think like 08, 09, 2010, 11. I used to read a lot of blogs, and I think a lot of it was actually inspired by blogs, not even by books. There were some books, that Dan Pink books early on I read, which I really liked. Daniel Pink.
Yeah.
That was quite insightful. I went to a seminar in 2011 by T. Harv Eker called The Millionaire
Mm.
Mind Intensive. The cheesiest name ever. Like, it's so like self-helpy, self-developmenty. Very American. Here in
Right.
the UK, even we see that as a contrast, that kind of self-help, rah-rah kind of Tony Robbins-esque type of thing. You know what? It was actually really good. It was really good in terms of mindsets and stuff. And I got the book, and I don't even think I ended up reading that book. But that 2011 seminar I went to, I think it was like pretty cheap, because they were like upselling stuff. But it was good. It was really good. Yeah. So I'm not sure, but I'll tell you that The Millionaire Fastlane, I introduced that book to Ali Abdaal. He loves it, and now it's one of his top books. That book had a
Yeah.
big impact on me. I loved that book, The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco.
Mhm.
Another book that I really loved is The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. And that is great, about resistance and about that feeling of procrastination, perfectionism, that resistance you feel to actually doing the productive thing that you need to do, the fear that you
Yeah.
feel. That's a great book. Well, yeah, those are the ones that come to mind immediately. I remember trying to read the biography of Warren Buffett back when I was
Mm.
a teenager, like I was like 15, 16. And it's this big, thick book. I've still got it somewhere, or maybe I gave it away. Oh no, there it is. It's like this fat black book. And
Yeah.
it was just so dense and well, actually, forget how it's written. Warren Buffett is just extremely unrelatable. He's just a strange guy. He was like buying stocks and shares when he was 8. He was like, I'm like 16 and I've got no clue how to do that. What the hell?
I don't even know
Like,
what it
so,
is at that time.
and this guy's doing it in what, the 1930s? This is ridiculous. Maybe not 30s, it was like 50s or something. I don't know. This is just ridiculous. I think it was like the 40s. So, yeah, I remember that was really fascinating. But actually, Warren Buffett, that was one of the early things that actually kind of propelled me to like, I should maybe like look to how to make money, because this guy's just given away,
Mhm.
because the way I came across him is it was like the news that he'd given away 30 billion to charity. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, that number blew my mind. I was like, how do you give 30 billion away? And then he lives like really really like he's not rich. Like
Frugal.
he drives an
Yeah.
old car and like a simple house, and it's like, what? Like, he was just such a
Eats
strange
McDonald's. It's
character.
weird.
So that had an impact on me as well, but in the sense of like being unrelatable. And I do reference him a few times in the Unfair Advantage as somebody, he just says, I was just wired for capital accumulation, you know? And I talk about how talent does exist. Because I feel like in the like around 2015-ish, there was a lot of books around about how talent is overrated or talent doesn't even exist. And it's like, that's just BS. Like, definitely there's such a thing as talent. And so that's kind of one of the things that I kind of wanted to address in the book. So yeah, that's a kind of a sprinkling, and I feel like I should think about more of what books I read when I was younger. There was quite a few, but I've always been into that kind of thing of like self-development.
Yeah, I think it's good to take in other kind of information. Like you said, the people that just take action, there's not many of them, but they can't, you can't take action intentionally if you're not taking in information intentionally. And I think
Hmm.
that that's a really good perspective to take because there was a lot of books that had a big impact on me. But I think, like you said with Warren Buffett, he's so unrelatable that you can't really take much from it. And there was like a if then kind of perspective, like take on what they did then, like where when you can relate to where you're at now instead of learning from
Yeah.
where he's at now, because that's you can't learn from where he's at now, and that's a really cool a perspective to take. Um,
Yes.
in your book, you talk about working harder just is not the answer, and I love this perspective because I think a lot of us just think that more hours and more hours is going to be the path to success, 7 to 7 every single day, that kind of thing. But why is working harder not the answer, and what is the answer?
Yeah. See, it depends on how you put it. I feel like a more accurate way to say it is hard work is necessary but not sufficient.
Yeah.
You know?
Mhm.
And I think it's like, yeah, you need to work hard, but you know, it's all relative. I mean, waiters work hard. They work damn hard. They're on their feet all day. You know, janitors work damn hard. That it's just not the right model to just say work hard. It's just completely the wrong model. I remember, like there are a lot of rich people that just golf and just travel and just waste their time doing nothing. And it's like, what? Well, they're rich. Yeah, they just have a bunch of assets. Their money's making money for them. There's intergenerational wealth. So, what's the answer? Work hard. I mean, let's do the quote. There's a quote by Evan Spiegel. I opened the book with this because I found it fascinating, and actually, it really connected with people. And he says, "I am a young, white, educated male. I got really, really lucky, and life isn't fair." That's his quote. And guess what? There's context matters. He was speaking at a women's conference in Stanford. So that's so interesting. That's the whole male and the whole privilege thing. Okay, interesting. But what's his point? He says, don't work harder, work the system. Is his point. And working the system kind of has this connotation of potentially like gaming the system, like in a bad way. But it's not in a bad way. It's
Mhm.
just about understanding, like, work smarter, not harder. Um, know where you're stronger. Know where you can, you know. I'll give you just a funny little example. If I'd come so I was born in Iraq, in Baghdad. If I'd come to the UK, which is where I live now in London, when I was like 20 rather than when I was 3, I'd have a pretty thick accent. I'd have a pretty strong accent, and probably speaking wouldn't be as much of a strength in English, just generally. Well, let's take
Yeah.
even if I was even older, I'll just have a quite a heavy accent, maybe, or just in general, maybe just speaking. I'm the type that has a stutter or stumbles on my words, and just generally, okay, maybe I should write instead, or maybe I should code instead. And it's kind of as simple as that. When you put it that simply, it's like, oh, okay, yeah. It's just about, double down on your strengths. We've said that already. But it's not just your internal strengths, it's also your circumstantial strengths. And nobody in no business book talks about that. And we just have this very realistic take of saying, you know what, we don't all start at the same starting line. We don't have the same circumstances in life. And a lot of business and self-development books kind of underlying assumption is that you do. It's just not true.
Yeah.
And people don't like to talk about all the different privileges they've had. They don't like to talk about the family business, the inheritance, the loan from the parents. They don't like to talk about all that kind of stuff. And also, um you can be unaware of how many privileges that you've got. Just to be like
Great.
born in the United States or in the UK, or to even just have a good credit rating. I remember I did a job back when I wasn't starting my business. I needed to take a job. One of the jobs I took it was kind of like a Wolf of Wall Street type thing. So it wasn't a scam. I look back on it now and I was like, was that a scam? I don't think it was. I think it was legit. but they didn't have like qualification standards for the employees. So the people I was working with was like, they call them East End boys. East End of London is like kind of poorer, working class kind of um, guys that didn't go to university, guys who were not very well educated, guys who kind of had some troubles in their youth. And you know what? They couldn't get any loans. They had terrible credit ratings. I was like, why? They're like, oh yeah, I just had a phone bill when I was like 16 and I didn't know I had to pay it. And just something simple like that, which a lot of us have that privilege of, like having parents that tell us, hey, you should pay this, and here's what a credit rating is, or something, or even just just to be able to have stability to do that kind of stuff. We just take it for granted. And I think gratitude is very important, and to look at the blessings that we've got.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in full support of that. I think we don't take enough perspective in that. And being able to do that is another leaning into the strengths, leaning into what we are given. And the gratitude is something that's so empowering. There's one last question I ask every single guest, and encapsulates what I want to do with this podcast. The question is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
That's a good one. So what pops into my mind immediately is that it took me a while, and I think I've made a lot of progress on this, but I grew up not wealthy. And to really value my time and to like delegate and outsource things, even though I did that in my first business, but to do it for my personal life as well. And I'll give you a quick example. So I've been a lot better since, but I remember back, so we were, my first holiday after COVID and lockdown and everything like that, because I have this habit, because I used to travel quite a bit because of the whole passive income, etc. I used to like overly research like flights, hotels, getting the best deal, how do you get some coupons, how do you like travel hack, and that kind of stuff. And I remember, because we were excited for this trip, the first one since COVID, etc. I did that same sort of thing. It wasn't more about travel hacking. It was just like I just did a ton of research into like what hotel to go to and stuff. And it's like, I was looking back on it, I was like, what the hell is the bang for buck for that? You know, like how much money did I save, or how much difference did it actually make in doing all that research? And so I think one of the things that I'm unlearning is to, work hard to like save the extra 10%. And I think that to have an offensive mindset and to think, let me just work on making more money, attracting more clients, creating more products, serving more people, creating more content, is going to be far more better use of my time than to save a buck here and there. So I think that's I'm still going through that change, but it's been a long journey. I've been financially relatively comfortable for a while, but it's like it's still there, man. That wiring of being young and having to be frugal and having to think that way, and like, yeah, it's crazy. So that's one of the things that's the first thing that popped into my head when you asked that question.
I definitely resonate with that, and I think it's a constant learning. I think, like, again, I think most of what we have to do is unlearn. We're looking for the answers outside of us, but we just need to unlearn the things that are holding us back. So, Hasan, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your knowledge and everything that you're putting into this world. All of your links will be in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, James. Appreciate it.